Jeff's problematic. I think puts too much emphasis on the importance of whether or not someone's a sinner. When Diarmuid MacCulloch came here after the election in Ireland, in which the Irish people said that they would accept marriage between homosexuals, Diarmuid said, "We told everybody the rules, but they loved each other." And then he went on to say what I thought was a tremendously interesting comment. Ireland is the most catechized, least evangelized country in the world. Now, what does that mean? I mean that fundamentally, and this is something that it's taken me a long time to outgrow from my seminarian training, that God's love is not only universal, but unconditional. And what that means is that it doesn't matter if a person's a sinner. It doesn't matter in a certain sense, except it's important for the person, that they make contrition and make up. That's a good thing. But it's not as if God's love depends on their doing that for him to actually bestowing it on them in the first place. Now, I teach classes now, compared to when I came here in '71, where for most of the students, the sacrament of confirmation is really the sacrament of departing from the church. It was always true that people were more interested in learning how to drive than they were in preparation for confirmation. But now, there is a certain sense in which they don't understand confirmation as stopping just believing what their parents believe and owning the belief for themselves. That has a lot to do with their parents, but also it has a lot to do with the culture. I think the awful mistake that the church has made is not to emphasize these other conditions. It always has talked about these conditions. In fact, I came from 8 years in my diocesan seminary where it was pretty clear that what we were taught is that there's no salvation outside the church. That's simply not true. The other thing is this. I really believe that people really need proximate models. Basically, if a person's going to become Christian, you have to get loved into it. And you get loved into it by people who were evangelized, but chances are they're evangelized because they got loved into it by concrete people. And I remember in my own life, I wasn't a pillar of virtue. And I remember how much effect it had that I looked up to people who were much more integral than me. And I wanted to become their friend, and luckily they wanted to become my friend too. And so it was through their influence that I gradually got to be better than I had been. Not that I'm a paragon now, but still, what I think is, if you meet somebody who's definitely a sinner, if you remember that God loves them, what God did in being crucified for them was to show that he means to enter into friendship in an unconditional way. And the only way to treat that person is with tenderness. is with love. And that's the only thing. There's no use messing around trying to analyze their sinfulness and so forth, because in a way you can't get out of that. But in a way, no matter what, God loves you. And then I think it's true that when you treat people tenderly, no matter if they're the spawn of the devil, as some people used to say, that changes them. They don't realize that God loves them. But they could realize that if you act with tenderness toward them, no matter how they are, no matter what they seem to be like, and when they, and that could just transform people. And I've seen that happen sometimes in my own life, and I feel absolutely clear that God doesn't expect everybody to understand his love and acceptance in Christian terms. But nevertheless, the Spirit, on account of the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, is sent to everybody. Nobody's left out. And so everybody has that operative in some way in their life. And I just tell students, when you come to that position and you see that there's what you know the alternative courses of action, and you know the one thing that you should do, but you choose not to do it. See, that's not such a good idea. But the fact that you have that intention that you're pretty sure is in line with the good, and that's the Spirit. The Spirit is operating and letting you know, enlightening you to know. And I'm confident in that. And I feel like when I tell my Chinese students who tell me they've never heard of God in China before they came to BC, I tell them it's still present there, no matter what. You see? And so I think the idea of evangelization is not to tell people sign here, but it is to help them fall in love with God insofar as we really feel that we're in love with God. And so that's how I would answer that question. And I think the problem with these people who are distressed by Vatican II, you had the explosion. Lonergan said to Matt Lamb when he was going to leave the Trappists and become the university guy, he first warned them that don't forget, universities are full of jungle warfare. But the second thing he said is when the church has been sitting on the lid for 400 years and suddenly it's taken off, there's bound to be an explosion, which is what happened. All kinds of silly stuff happened after the Second Vatican Council and scandalized people. And there still is this kind of loosey-goosey thing that sometimes is credited with being the Second Vatican Council, but it has nothing really to do with the Second Vatican Council. And so I think just as there was an overreaction to the explosion, so now there's an overreaction to the results of the explosion. So that you have this thing that you're talking about in terms of the attitudes of your students and I hear that it's universal. All the seminaries are going through that same thing. And so what we have to do is, as Lonergan once told me when I was fairly depressed, you still have to hope. That's with a capital H. So that's what I would say. At any rate, that's my response. And I know we're all exhausted, so thank you very much. Thanks so much. That was wonderful responses you guys did. I was too exhausted to understand yours. appreciated the way Jeff raised that question that he had. And I don't know whether I answered it, but I gave it a shot. Thanks a lot.